I was born into a Jewish Ashkenazi family. Despite the fact that we are not a religious family, I grew up going to a Reform synagogue and attended services from time to time. When I was only 8 years old, my synagogue took us on a trip to Israel, and this was my first time ever visiting the Holy Land. Although I might have been a little too young at the time to understand the full history of Israel, I knew deep down that this was a very integral part of Jewish identity. About 5 years later, I was bar mitzvahed. This helped bring me closer to my faith and the local Jewish community. It also helped me strengthen my relationships with rabbis and other very important leaders. My elementary, middle, and high school experience was had at Shek Hillel Community School. For the 10 years that I attended, we were all taught the values of the Torah, the story of the Jewish people, and to take pride in our religion by combating any anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias that we may ever come across. In 2014, I returned to Israel for my second time on the 9th grade Hillel trip. This time, I got a much better understanding as to how important and biblical this land was to the three Abrahamic religions, which comprises of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. As someone who's not really involved in any political group or activist type of organizations, I wanted to get the perspective from those who have been on the front lines of fighting anti-Semitism on and off college campuses.
Zionism is the Jewish people's right to self-determination in the ancient land of Israel. Israel is our homeland. Jews are indigenous to Israel. Before it was called Israel, it was called Judea. Jews come from Judea, just like Chinese come from China and the Russians come from Russia. Jews come from Judea. We're indigenous to that land, and it is a self-determination movement to be free and govern ourselves and be sovereign in our homeland. It's a civil rights movement. It's a liberation movement, and we're very proud of it. It's one of the most moral, ethical movements in the history of humankind. It's actually the most successful example of decolonization because the Jews were indigenous there. Foreign conquerors came in and colonized the land for their own purposes, and we have now since thrown out all the foreign invaders and reasserted sovereignty in our land. People try paint it to be the opposite. They try invert it. They try claim it's racist, and they try claim Zionism itself is colonization, which is the most absurd twisting of facts in the history of the world because it is the most successful human example of decolonization. But again, in today's modern society, when you get called something, when someone labels you as something, it's not entirely about the facts. It's not entirely about the history. You can suddenly be called a racist or a misogynist or a colonizer or a supremacist, and the argument comes to almost a grinding halt because now it's no longer about facts, it's about narratives. So that's a challenge that we face when trying to educate about Israel. We know the facts, we have the history, we're on the right side of history, we can give you every historical fact. However, when we get called these names, especially on large scales like in the media, immediately the discussion is no longer about facts, it's about emotions.
Well, anti-Semitism is a very big theme right now, especially with the rise of far left-wingers and right-wingers, because they feel like they have authority to mainly pick on Jews. And I think that the bigger problem is far left-wing anti-Semitism, because most people reject right-wing anti-Semitism. And so what the left has done, which is actually very clever, they have gone through the systems. If you're talking about school systems or institutions in terms of workplace, in New York, where Bill de Blasio, who was sending for the NYPD, he's sending them after Jews in Brooklyn, so they don't go to synagogue and they can't do anything. They just have to stay in their houses all the time. So what the left has done is they've institutionalized anti-Semitism through their systems and convinced people that, oh, well, this is not hatred, this is just helping the Palestinians or helping people in a certain way. And many kids who think of this stuff, they actually think they're not bigoted, and I don't believe they are. They're just brainwashed.
First off, you have organizations like Student Justice for Palestine, which some of the pro-Palestinian activists, they claim that they want to fight for freedom for Palestine, but in fact will use pretty violent means of activism such as
Fuck the movement, fuck all of us, fuck the mothers, fuck the daughters, and short the folk of Palestine. Shut them out, rape the daughters, if you have to send them back in the dust.
You said mean comments?
Yeah, he said very hateful comments.
Move back.
Don't try to look like that.
Move back.
they attack the Jewish students on campus. They also threaten pro-Israeli students on campus. And at my university as well, they have tabled on campus, and while they were tabling, they had an image of the Israeli flag with bloodstains all over it. And they were also selling copies of Mein Kampf for about $2 that students could come by to their table and buy and then read. And then you also have professors who actually support Student Justice for Palestine on these American college institutions. And they would constantly call me into disciplinary action committees, attacking me for my support of Israel. They would humiliate me in front of the board. They would read out my tweets one by one. After that, I called a good friend of mine about the incident, and I asked her if she could go through my Twitter and look through my tweets and see if anything was offensive. And she said, well, I don't find anything to be offensive except for you are very pro-Israel. And she thought that was bad. Some people would know that I'm not Jewish, and then they just attack me anyway for supporting Israel because they think it's an apartheid state. Recently, I was walking with a good friend of mine who's Jewish. He was wearing a Star of David shirt, and someone actually came up to him and coughed on him and threatened him for being Jewish. And he ended up being infected with COVID-19 from this anti-Semitic student. So I've definitely had my encounters with anti-Semitism, unfortunately, on my campus.
So, given the fact that I'm an outspoken public Zionist speaker, I deal with anti-Semitism on a daily basis, on university and college campuses, in high schools, online, when we're speaking to different people like professors or news media personalities. In my personal inbox, I get a lot of anti-Semitic hate mail, and physically in person when I go speak at events, we've had mobs and riots, and we need to have security around us in order to protect us from the anti-Semitism that manifests as violence sometimes. Check out these images.
So I served a total of 2 years, which is a normal woman's service. For guys, it's 2 years, 8 months. So I served in search and rescue, which is we are trained for 8 months how to rescue and use rescue tools in case, rockets are being sent over and, we need to find people under rubble and cement and how to cut in cement. It's a really big process, and doctors and doing simulations to really prepare us for the real thing. But otherwise, in the meantime, we were serving in the West Bank, protecting Israeli villages. I've had people saying that my point of view of World War II was wrong and ignorant and incorrect. I'm like a grandchild of a survivor, Holocaust survivor. So it hits hard when someone's like, you're wrong. And I'm like, excuse me. I've had another professor say, we were talking about intermarriage and like between cousins, and we were all guessing what religion it was. I didn't think it was Judaism, but the way he referred to it was, guess who it is? They have a lot of money. And I was like, are you sure he just said that? And he did kind of cover it up with, I have a friend who's Jewish, and he always asks, where's the money? But that is, it's still an anti-Semitic,
My name is Jennifer Karlan, and I'm a high school senior, and I go to public school, but I went to Jewish day school for 9 years of my life prior to that, and I am a fellow in Club Z, a national Zionist youth movement, and I've recently been speaking out at rallies and protests against anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses, against the ethnic studies model curriculum in California, because I just see so much how anti-Semitism manifests itself in different ways through anti-Zionism or whatever new term it may take on. It's ultimately anti-Semitism. And so as a Jew, as a proud Jew who's been raised to be that way, I stand up for my people and I stand up what I know is right.
In 2021, on the streets of Los Angeles just a few days ago, Jews were attacked at a restaurant simply because they were Jewish. But the origin of these attacks is far more insidious. They no longer say they hate the Jew. Today they say they hate Zionists. Today they no longer say they hate the Jewish people. They say they hate the Zionist entity, but the hate is the same.
For me, I've seen on high school classrooms as well as on college campuses that the way that they go about anti-Semitism and embedding it in curriculum, they won't directly attack the Jews, because obviously that is wrong and vile and everyone knows that, but they'll attack Israel and they'll attack the Jewish state. And they'll put it through the lens of Jews, or rather Israel, as being, some sort of imperialist identity. And they'll say that, Israel is a white colonist entity, and they'll associate it with imperialism, they'll associate it with other isms. And so when we're in this world in which intersectionality is so important and standing up for the oppressed is the most important value that we have, when Israel is painted as a state that has power and a state that almost is maligned to be seen as if it were almost a colonialist entity, which it obviously is not, because Israel essentially is the movement of decolonization of the Jews returning home. But when anti-Semites paint Israel in that light, then people think that Israel is racist or apartheid or colonialist, and that is the biggest flaw, that they'll put Israel in the lens of an oppressor in critical race theory. And I've seen that personally from friends and peers in high school classrooms, and I've seen it in the college environment as well. So in order to combat that, in truth, we must know that the facts about Israel, that it isn't a colonist regime, that it's actually a movement of decolonization, and we have to know that Israel is a movement of liberation. So in addition to Club Z, there's a great movement, a grassroots movement called End Jew Hatred that I've been a part of, in which we basically take to the streets and protest and get into rallies and fight for what is right whenever we see some sort of anti-Semitic act, whether in a college campus or in terms of curriculum being implemented. And so these two groups are something that I've been a part of personally, and they've really helped me understand what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be an indigenous person to the land of Israel.
The quest to destroy the Jewish people never dies. It only changes its form.
I will say, Jews, one of our greatest challenges is ourselves, that we have other Jews who decide to fight against us for whatever reason, and there's, a plethora of reasons for why this is. But movements like JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now, hurt our cause. And the greatest problem with these movements is that they don't recognize fundamental rights. You cannot start the story of the Jewish people in a year so modern. Our story predates all of the modern conflicts. Our story is as old as the Torah itself. Our story is thousands and thousands of years old. And so when I realize they're not looking at us from the lens that is the truth, that we are indigenous peoples, they're going to miss half the story, and they're never going to do justice to the truth. So I think that sometimes groups like JDP hurt our own cause, and they don't paint the full story, and they don't tell us the full truth of our history, which is why we need groups like Club Z and End Jew Hatred and IBSI to stand up and teach the truth and fight for the right side of history.
I am a 17-year-old Jewish girl. Soon I will be going to college, and I will be faced with the same anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic rhetoric that we see across the country.
I would say my concerns going into a college environment in which I know that my views and my beliefs as a Jew and as a proud Zionist and believer in my indigeneity, I will be faced with lots of hate from the other side. So I would hope that when my professors are to grade assignments and assess me in many ways, I would hope that they wouldn't take my personal views into account. But I've heard stories that more often than not, it seems that students who identify as proud Jews and proud Zionists, that does affect how professors view them. And I only hope that in the future, we as a Jewish community, as people who support truth and justice, can be able to, bring the light and shed the light to teachers and to professors of the sort, because I think that no one's political views, no one's religious views or identity should get in the way of their education. And that's what I firmly believe in, and I hope that we'll be able to change that in the future.
I ask of you, for the sake of social justice, for the sake of peace, and for the sake of future generations of Jews like me and you, condemn anti-Semitism in all its forms.
My name is Joshua Washington, and I am the Executive Director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. We are an education-first organization, so our first and foremost priority is teaching and unearthing the truth. We focus a lot on the Black-Jewish relationship, the Israel-Africa relationship, and the current issues that we find ourselves in now, the state of Black America today, in regards to Zionism, in regards to the Jewish community, and even in regards to human rights issues. We tackle some of these things and kind of dive deep into not only what being a Zionist really is, but also how the Black civil rights struggle has been hijacked and continues to be hijacked for other personal gain. A lot of emotional manipulation is what went into kind of getting some of the Black community, I should say, to side against Israel. And so we expose those things and discuss those things and make sure that we, tell the truth and teach in that fashion. So one of the ways that these anti-Israel biases and anti-Jewish teachings and stuff are able to be propagated in high school, college campuses, and curriculum. I was in California just last week to protest the critical ethnic studies curriculum, is that the teachings come from, whether it's biased individuals who are self-proclaimed Marxists, people here in this country who teach, who have this agenda and this ideology that they want to push. The authors of the original draft of the California Ethnic Studies curriculum model, for instance, that was vetoed, they stepped down from writing the curriculum, and then they proceeded to go and travel to individual California school districts to promote the curriculum themselves, even though it wasn't just Jewish people had a problem with it. A lot of minority groups had a problem with what was being portrayed in the curriculum, because on top of it being very biased, a lot of stuff wasn't true. For instance, their depiction of Martin Luther King, they depicted him as a weak man, and that first draft of the curriculum diminished his role in the civil rights movement and elevated other more violent civil rights, more the militant civil rights people. It didn't really present the two sides as just opposing viewpoints and how to approach things. It approached it as Dr. King was wrong and these people were right. You also have people here who, because of their own biases and because of their own prejudices against Jews and against Israel, they are pushing this to be taught in schools, and for kids to, and not only for it to be taught in schools, but for these courses, like these social studies courses, these ethnic studies courses, to be mandatory for students to take in order to graduate. For us in the Western world to, impose our view of skin color onto the Jewish community, onto this very non-Western thing like Israel, it's like a form of colonization, because we're forcing our viewpoint and our culture onto theirs. The whole white Jew, black Jew, brown Jew thing is really something that we do here in the West. That's just not how it works. There are Jews from all over the world, they're different colors, but they're all Jews. Ashkenazi Jews are just as indigenous to Israel as Ethiopian Jews. Just as indigenous as Jews in China and Jews in India and Jews in South America and Jews in Nigeria. Like, they're just as indigenous as all those Jews in the diaspora. There are different blood libels that are often told against the Jewish people. One of them is that they drink the blood of Palestinian children. Someone posted that Israel commits ritual killings of Palestinians. Some people engage in blood libels in the form of Jews in America. They say that this particular Jewish businessman is controlling every facet of our politics, and they're controlling the police department, and they're the reason why we have police brutality. Some people say that Israel's the reason why we have police brutality, and Israel's the cause for whenever a policeman murders, particularly a black man on the streets, it's because Israel taught them how to do it. So these are the blood libels there. I mean, hatred of the Jewish people is ancient, and so it's I think people tend to gravitate toward these lies to explain sometimes why, for instance, the Jewish community has been able to make such great strides in history since back in Jim Crow days, when they, along with us, couldn't attend white colleges and couldn't be in white spaces and weren't allowed to do a lot of things. They were still able to be very, very successful, and so sometimes people try to attribute negative intentions to that. The peaceful, usually they're actually black Jews, and they don't really cause any trouble. They just practice their religion and do their own thing. Unfortunately, the group that's the loudest are usually based here in the West, in the US and the UK. They're the ones who spout the ideology that the white Jews are fake and that they're the real Jews. Black Americans and the black people in the West are the Jews. They're authentic. They're the only Jews. Base their beliefs on scripture in Deuteronomy. There's a verse there that talks about that they feel is an allusion to the slave trade, which I heard a lot of people talk about. And so they say, based on this, the real Jews are the ones who got carted off to America during the transatlantic slave trade. To me, there may be a little bit of truth in that, because there are Jews in West Africa, and so some of those people who actually came over here might actually have that heritage. That still doesn't make the argument that all Jews are Black Americans, which is what they say. They call the white Jews fake. They call them Amalek, which is one of Israel's enemies in the scriptures. And synagogue of Satan, all these different things that they kind of piece together. And the reason why they have a little bit of a stronghold is that they exploit the lack of biblical knowledge of Christians, sometimes even pastors. They'll confront them and they'll throw these verses at them that maybe they've never even seen before, and they don't know how to respond. Even some Christian friends of mine that I knew when I was younger are Black Hebrew Israelites now. We grew up at a different church together, and part of what happens, like I said, is that they get exposed for the lack of scripture that they know, and they think that what they're being told is truth, because wow, I've never seen this before. Wow, this blows my mind. This guy must have all the knowledge, and so it's really been damaging to the Black community, and particularly people of faith, which is why one of the reasons why people like Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam was and still is able to penetrate in the Black community is that they don't just go out there and teach anti-Jewish stuff. Farrakhan will talk about important issues. Nation of Islam has a history of actually going into inner city Black communities and helping people get out of drugs and out of gangs and to get jobs and get them on their feet. And this is one of the ways that he's been able to, when he speaks and does his anti-Jewish stuff, that people don't really call him out on it, and a lot of people believe him, is because they kind of see him as like a father figure.
It's this that they fear.
That's right.
I don't have no army.
That's right.
I just know the truth. And I'm here to separate the good Jews from the satanic Jews. Yes, yes, yes!
One of the ways that we're fighting at IPSI is not just teaching, but actually mentoring, taking people under our wing and walking them through these things, unraveling these things. People, again, just like in history, who are combating slavery right now are Jewish, just like the people who fought slavery back then. So, you know, we do those types of things, you know, not just show people how great Jewish people have been and how great Israel has been, but to actually expose where the lies are coming from and where the exploitation is coming from. Because these same countries that practice slavery, some of the people from these countries and people who represent these countries are out and demonizing Israel and covering up the countries that they represent and the countries that whether they're from or countries that they've been to, are practicing slavery. And they try to cover that stuff up and kind of use the Jews as a scapegoat. So we try to expose those things. For those people who are kind of in the middle, they don't really want to take a strong stance either way. They recognize that there's a lot of complexity, a lot of historical context. So don't allow emotionalism alone to sway you. Don't allow, you know, someone screaming and yelling with tears in their eyes even to sway you. Do research. Ask questions, talk to people, weigh it out for yourself. Zionism is not a bad word. It's not a racial thing. It literally is that Jews, and Jews of all colors, Jews, people who are Jewish, are indigenous to the land of Israel, or to what was once called Judea. And that's really what it is. You know, don't let anyone make you believe that that's some sort of twisted, evil thing, because it isn't.